Hey, I'm Cheryl from We're in the Rockies, and my husband Matt is behind the camera. And today we are at Grand Teton National Park. And the whole purpose of our channel is to help people travel to the West. So today what we want to do is tell you the things that nobody tells you about Grand Teton. Whether you're visiting or whether you're not, it's either interesting or it's going to be super helpful. The first thing I want to let you know is that Grand Teton is actually, to me, seems like two parks. I think of it, it's long and skinny, and there's a north and south end. The north end is where there's Jackson Lake and Coulter Bay, and it almost kind of feels like a lake village. People can boat there. The whole town kind of has a lake town vibe. Now you go to the southern part, and that's where you see a lot of the very famous shots of like the Molten Barn and the prairie and the jagged mountains coming up. Now don't misunderstand, the jagged mountains are everywhere, but the prairie is in front of the mountains on the southern side, and to be honest, it's my favorite part of the park. If you go up north, there's a little more forest that kind of will block the views, and so just to know that Teton looks a little different, but some of the most famous photo spots are on the northern end of the park. The next thing to know about visiting Grand Teton is you don't need a reservation. Many of the national parks have switched over to where you need a reservation to come into the park or to go on a certain hike. None of that is true for Grand Teton National Park. You do not need a reservation for anything unless you're going to like the mural dining room at night. The next thing to know is that Grand Teton does not take a backseat to wildlife, to Yellowstone. I honestly believe that you will see just as much, if not more, wildlife here in Grand Teton. We've been here for about 2.5 days. We've seen bald eagles, moose, elk, deer, antelope, beavers, bison. And we've seen bear here before too, but especially if you want to see a moose, Grand Teton is the place to see a moose. You will see a lot of wildlife at Grand Teton National Park. The next thing to know is that Grand Teton is small enough that it's not that big of a deal where you get your lodging. Whereas Yellowstone is humongous, Grand Teton is significantly smaller, not nearly as wide, and you can drive from one end of the park to the other in about an hour. My personal preference, I love to stay in Grevant on the southern end. But, even if you're staying up north in Coulter Bay, it's not difficult to get down to the southern end of the park and back up in one day. So you can pick your lodging, stay there for your entire trip and be able to access a lot of things. The next thing I want to tell you before I give this back to Matt to tell you the rest of the cool stuff about how to visit Grand Teton and the special tips we have is that Grand Teton is more than a day trip from Yellowstone. I think a lot of times people, like Yellowstone, let's face it, is the popular park. Everyone dreams of going to Yellowstone. And a lot of times if people even make it down to Grand Teton, it's an afterthought. Grand Teton has so much to offer, from the wildlife to the views. There's river cruises, hiking. It is just an incredible park that really deserves 2 to 3 days time, not just a day trip from Yellowstone.
Okay, my name is Matt, and I'm going to cover the rest of this list here for you. And I'm sorry if I have a little shade on my eyes here from the bill of my hat, but you don't want to see my hair right now. So, we've been camping for the last 2 days. We're kind of a mess. Okay, the next thing you need to know is just a little bit about the terminology. So, you hear the terms Jackson Hole, Jackson, Grand Teton. What do they refer to? Jackson Hole is the entire valley here in this area. Okay, Jackson Hole is the valley. Jackson is the city that sits at the southern end of the valley, and Grand Teton is the national park, which takes up most of the Jackson Hole Valley, also the Teton Mountains behind us, but it does not encompass Jackson, the town, Jackson, the city of Wyoming. So just knowing the terminology will help you out a little bit. Okay, the next thing to know is that it is expensive to visit Grand Teton and Jackson Hole. Now, Grand Teton itself is not that expensive. It just requires the National Park Pass to get in there, which is $35 for a week, $80 for the America the Beautiful Pass that covers all the national parks for an entire year. But the Jackson Hole area and Jackson the city are quite expensive. This is just a really kind of a popular tourist town, basically, and so the prices are quite expensive. Lodging, it's not uncommon for lodging to be $1,000 a night or more. Cheap lodging around $400 a night. Now, a lot of people are coming here for that upper end experience, that ski resort town type of an experience. So think about what you want out of it. What we usually encourage people to do is to at least maybe get a little bit of a slice of something kind of nice, like a river rafting trip or a horseback riding trip or bike riding or something like that. Think of Grand Teton as part of kind of an adventure area. You want to do some experiences in there to kind of liven your trip up a little bit. Also, I've done a video on lodging in Grand Teton that tells you all that you need to know about lodging. Okay, the next thing to know is that camping can be competitive, and that's because the lodging is so expensive. So people do like to camp in Grand Teton. It's a great place to camp because you can have moose wander right through your campground, really. Even bears, perhaps, you know, close by. So it's a great way to kind of experience the wildlife and just, you know, the beautiful valley of Jackson Hole. So, but it is competitive because so many people like us on this trip, rather than paying $400 a night for hotels, we paid $40 a night for campgrounds in the park. Two basic things to know about this. Inside Grand Teton National Park, you need a reservation to get a campground. They have all moved over to reservation on recreation.gov. There are many campgrounds outside of the park on Forest Service land, and those are all first come, first serve. You just have to show up and hope you get a spot. During COVID, they were all insanely out of control. It was actually really hard to find spots. I think that's tampered down a little bit this year, but you know, you never know from year to year. But that's kind of how that works. Now again, I've done a whole nother video on what you need to know if you're camping at Grand Teton and in the Jackson Hole Valley. Okay, the next thing to know is that it is open year-round. So Yellowstone mostly shuts down in the winter. Now there are activities you can do in Yellowstone, like you can snowmobile in or take a snow coach in, you can ski, you can go to Lamar Valley. I mean, there are plenty of things you can do in Yellowstone in the winter, but so many of those towns around the edge shut down, and there's a lot of roads that are just closed off completely. Here in Grand Teton, the highway that goes through it is a major thoroughfare. Like, it has to be open all year long. And it sits at a lower elevation than Yellowstone. It's not quite as severe as Yellowstone in the winters. And actually, of course, the Tetons, it's a ski town, so it is open year-round for skiing, some high-end skiing, some of the most famous skiing in the country. And then also they have a national elk refuge on the south end of Jackson, where all the elk come down from Yellowstone to the elk refuge in the winter and kind of hang out there and graze there for the winter. So you can actually visit the elk refuge and take a sleigh ride out to see the elk. There's quite a few different activities that you can do in the winter, so just be aware that that could be a pretty fun, like, Thanksgiving or even a Christmas getaway for you. Okay, the next thing to know about Grand Teton is that getting here takes some time and money, actually, just getting here. It's interesting because it is on the west side of the Rocky Mountains, like Yellowstone is. But to get in here is actually not all that easy. You have to cross over the Tetons to get in, or you're crossing over the Wind Rivers to get in from the east, or you're coming down through Yellowstone on the from the north. So it's actually kind of just tucked away in this little valley here that takes quite a bit of time to drive to. Like, if you're coming from Salt Lake City, that's kind of the nearest major airport, would be 5 hours or something like that. Bozeman, if you're coming from Bozeman, Montana, it's probably 4 hours or so from Bozeman. Takes a little bit of time to get here. If you're flying here, one thing we've learned is that people who are flying from the east, it costs a fair amount of money to fly into some of these airports. The closest airports are not all that large. You've got Bozeman, Montana, Idaho Falls. There's actually an airport in Grand Teton National Park, the Jackson Airport. That's a big airport that people fly into for Jackson and for Yellowstone as well. But these are small airports, so they end up costing a fair amount of money. Salt Lake City, a much larger airport, international airport, but it still tends to cost a little bit of money to get there, and then you have that drive coming from Salt Lake City. Okay, the next thing to know about Jackson Hole, and the whole area is that Jackson is a love or a hate town. I'm telling you, there's nobody that's on the fence here about this. You either love it or you hate it. It's an old West town, so a lot of people kind of dream of coming here and just getting a little slice of that kind of cowboy life. But the thing is, this is like the rich cowboy life, I guess. This is sort of fake cowboy life in a way. I mean, there's people that are coming in from California and buying up a lot of these homes and condos and stuff like that here in Jackson, and the prices have just gone skyrocketed. It's always been kind of a rich person's town, a lot of art and things like that, mixed in with that old West, which is actually kind of cool. I think that's actually kind of cool, but most people, you either love it or you hate it. A lot of people are coming here, they've heard all this about Jackson, and they get here and they're like, this is it, you know, it's just kind of window shopping and it's really expensive. And then other people just love it. They want to come here and enjoy being surrounded by the mountains while they're in this little town. So just be forewarned, if you have been to Jackson, we want to know, do you love it or hate it? Cheryl actually hates Jackson. She doesn't like it that much. I think it's fine. I actually like Jackson, but just for a short amount of time, and then I want to get up into the hills here. Okay, we have many resources for you if you're visiting Jackson and Grand Teton. We have a playlist on YouTube. Just binge that playlist and take some notes as you go. We have a website, we'reintherockies.com, that you can go on there and find answers to your questions about Grand Teton and all that. We have an itinerary, a step-by-step itinerary on how to see the park, and I make an audio guide for it. You can actually listen to me, give you a tour of the park as you drive around. Check that out on our website, we'reintherockies.com. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, go west, young traveler.